What's the scariest encounter you've had with a total stranger? Story 1. I was probably 16, sitting at home alone on the computer when I looked up and saw a man on my back patio, looking at the windows and heading toward the door. I have no idea what came over my stupid teenage girl mind, but I opened the door and firmly told him to leave. It felt like the voice that came out of me was not mine. It was guttural, deep, and grounded, which was the opposite of how I felt. He looked at me and did not move. He was not shocked. It was almost like he was trying to challenge me or scare me by holding his ground. I said leave one more time with the same voice, and he backed up. He said he was just looking for paint, and I responded that I was about to start looking for my dad's gun, even though my divorced dad did not live with us and there was no gun in the house. I slammed the door, locked it, and went to call 911. They found the guy breaking into another house down the street, thank God. I even got to pick him out of a lineup. It is still one of my scariest moments and possibly one of the stupidest moments in my life. Story 2, I was 21 at the time and in a store picking up some items for my house when I noticed a man was literally peeking at me from around a corner. At first, I brushed it off and continued my shopping, but I was aware that this man was following me around the store. He then called out to me and said I looked familiar and asked if I went to the local university. I did not, so I said no, and at that point I got creeped out, checked out, and went to my car. I heard footsteps behind me and knew he had followed me, so I jumped in my car and locked the doors. It was dark, so I had not noticed him go around the back of my car until he banged on my passenger window. I ignored him and started the car, which prompted him to run around the front and start banging on my driver's side door, trying to open it and asking me for a ride. I was terrified and pulled out of the parking space as fast as I could and drove off, with him chasing my car until I rounded a corner. I have no idea what his plan was, but to this day I am nervous about dark parking lots at night. Story 3. I was taking a shower in the bathroom of the walkout basement. My 3-year-old son was upstairs with my mother eating breakfast. I heard him open the door and told him that mommy was in the shower and he had to wait. The door did not close, but he did not respond either, so I asked him to go back upstairs and ask Grandma for whatever he needed. Instead, I saw a shadow and the outline of a hand touching the shower curtain and realized that there was an adult in the bathroom, not my son. I screamed and punched through the shower curtain. I do not think I connected, but I heard the man run out anyway. As fast as I could, I jumped out and grabbed a towel to check on my son and my mom. At the same time, my mom was coming downstairs to see if I was okay because of the scream. The man never went upstairs and they did not even know it had happened. The walkout basement door and window were open. I called the police, but they did not find him, only my empty wallet about a block away. They came back a few weeks later to tell me they had caught a guy in the area attacking women at gunpoint and that they thought it was the same person. I have never been so scared in my life. Story 4, I was at a storage depot with my ex, picking up some stuff, when suddenly and without warning, this older guy appeared out of nowhere and started a conversation with my ex. I was inside the unit at the time, so it was possible he did not know I was there, but the clipped tone and short answers from my ex were enough for me to know he was making her uncomfortable. That was when I heard him say, "Do not worry, I am not going to attack you or anything." So if literally 2 or 3 sentences into a conversation with a total stranger, he thought that was reassuring. I stepped out of the unit, making my presence known by moving some things around in the hall, and his whole demeanor changed, somewhere between embarrassment and aggression, that I had dared to insert myself into whatever he thought this was. My ex stayed back while I kept his attention on me, and he criticized me for calling him mate, saying it was rude and disrespectful to a stranger. I responded by asking whether it was as rude and disrespectful as bringing up violence to a young woman he thought was alone. He shuffled away, mumbling something about knowing the management, leaving both of us shaken. To this day, I have no idea what was wrong with him, but it was clear he was not used to being confronted, and I still wonder what might have happened if my ex had been alone. Story 5. I was once driving in the countryside, and it was pouring rain in the dead of night, so hard that I was driving very slowly and could not see any of the road signs, this being before global positioning systems were common. I had never experienced rain that heavy in my life. I had to pull over to the side of the road to try to see a sign and figure out if I was going in the right direction. I did not get out because of the rain, so I was craning my neck forward, trying to make out where I was, when suddenly the passenger door opened and a man got inside the car, sat down and looked at me. This was in South Africa, where there is a fair amount of violent crime and carjackings. So I instinctively started panicking, yelling and screaming at the top of my lungs, flailing my arms to try to do something, anything, to stop this man from attacking me. He started screaming as well, clearly terrified, and jumped out of the car. I quickly leaned over, closed the passenger door, and sped off down the road. I was breathing heavily at that point, nearly in tears, trying my best to calm down. I kept replaying the moment in my head the entire time, and then suddenly remembered that the man had smiled at me. It dawned on me that he was probably a hitchhiker I had not seen, who thought I was pulling over to give him a ride, only to be greeted by me screaming and trying to hit him. It was probably his scariest encounter with a stranger as well. Story 6. I was friends with a guy back in high school. We lived in the same neighborhood and hung out together often. He ended up owing another guy money for marijuana. One day I walked to our neighborhood corner store to get a soda. As I was walking into the store parking lot, a very large guy came walking out of the store and noticed me. He approached me and said that I was my friend's friend and that he had seen us hanging out together, then told me my friend owed him money and asked where he lived because he needed to talk to him. I replied that he lived down toward that way, vaguely waving my hand in the wrong direction, away from where my friend actually lived, and then asked if that was all he needed to know. That must have rubbed him the wrong way. He stayed silent for a few seconds, making me think the interaction was over. As soon as I turned my head to walk away, he suddenly punched me in the face harder than I had ever been hit before. I honestly do not know how I was not knocked unconscious. I was sent reeling off the sidewalk and into the street in excruciating pain and shock, my vision turning red and purple for a few seconds, and all I could hear was a dull, repetitive noise, like the adults in the Charlie Brown cartoons. Thankfully, no cars were coming as I stumbled into the road. I am not the fighting type, and being taken off guard, terrified, and with my head throbbing, I just wanted to get away. As I was walking off, I heard him say that was what I got for having a smart mouth and told me to tell my friend to call him. Looking back, I can see how my response could have been taken the wrong way, as I have struggled with social interactions my whole life and am not always good at phrasing things, sometimes saying awkward or unintentionally offensive things. I was nervous in that situation and blurted out what I thought would end the conversation quickly. It is also possible the man was looking for any excuse to lash out over the money he was owed, and I happened to be a convenient target. Luckily, I never saw him again. My friend was extremely apologetic when he heard what happened, and even bought me a large bag of marijuana as part of his apology. I am not sure if he was ever confronted by the man he owed, but I stopped hanging out with him not long after. It was not the first sketchy situation tied to him, but it finally taught me to choose my friends more carefully and to distance myself from people who seem to attract constant trouble. Story 7. This one really sticks out to me because I have not had many truly scary encounters. Most just made me uncomfortable, but this one scared me in a different way. I was with my girlfriend at the time, along with two friends who were sisters, and we were all in our late 20s, walking around an outlet mall. I was about 10 feet behind the three of them, so to anyone else, it probably did not look like I was with them. They walked past a bench where a white guy was sitting, wearing a long black coat, with no other particularly noticeable features. For some reason, I noticed him as they approached, so I watched him closely. The moment the women were just out of his direct line of sight, he held up what looked like a police badge, keeping it very close to his body as if trying to hide the fact that he was showing it. He angled it toward them and followed them with it as they walked by, then put it away once they were about 5 feet past him. I am not sure if he stopped because he noticed me or not. It does not sound that scary on the surface, but all I could think was that this was someone working up the nerve to impersonate a police officer around women, and that someday he might hurt someone. I do not know if I got bad vibes from him before that moment or if I am misremembering, but it deeply unsettled me, and I still hope he was just an awkward person and not someone with worse intentions. Story 8. Back in January of last year when I was 21, I was traveling down the Pacific coast. While I was in San Diego, I decided to visit Black's Beach, which is a clothing-optional beach just north of the city. I was lying there trying to even out my tan lines when a man walked by and stopped about 15 feet to my right to lay out his towel. When he noticed me looking at him, he asked if he was invading my space. I thought it was a little strange how close he was given how empty the beach was that day, but I did not mind at first. That changed when he could not keep his hands to himself, sitting there for around 10 minutes while clearly behaving inappropriately and looking in my direction. I decided to take a walk down to the other end of the beach. When I reached the end and turned around, I noticed he was not far behind me and had followed me. When I got back to my things, I started getting dressed, and he did the same, finishing before I did. He thanked me again for letting him sit so close, made a joke about hoping he had not creeped me out, and then headed toward the stairs leading back to the parking lot. I walked in the opposite direction, found a more secluded spot, and stayed a while longer. I never truly felt like I was in immediate danger, but it was an extremely unsettling experience, and it gave me a better understanding of what women are forced to deal with far too often. Story 9. When my daughter turned 1, we went on a trip to Hawaii. While we were sitting in the airport waiting to check in for our tickets, a man approached me and started commenting on how beautiful my daughter was. That was fine at first, but it did not stop there. He stood over me and continued trying to touch her and asking about her age, birthday, favorite things, where we were going, and other personal details. I refused to answer, but he refused to move, and we felt trapped. When my husband came back, the man stepped away very quickly. I told airport security, but they did nothing. We got to our gate, and a few minutes later, the same man sat down in a spot where he could watch our daughter. If we moved seats, he kept her in his line of sight. I mentioned it to the gate agent, who brushed it off again. We boarded the plane, and he was also on the flight, seated where he could keep an eye on her. He kept smiling at her and getting up to walk the aisle past her. At one point, my husband got up, and the man came over and said in baby talk that he had figured out where we were going. I reported it to the flight attendant, who took it very seriously. He was forced to change seats and was not allowed to get up again. When we landed, there were people waiting for him who escorted him away, and we never saw him again. I am completely certain that our daughter would have been kidnapped or trafficked if we had not stayed alert and reported him. That was 2 years ago, and I still remember how terrified I was. Story 10. I was traveling home to California and passing through Nevada during an emergency, so I packed and left around midnight. It was about 5:30 in the morning in rural Nevada, at a stop on my usual route, just about an hour before the California border. As a woman traveling alone, I legally carried protection and had an extended permit that allowed concealed carry through several states, except California. I was at my truck in an empty area, sitting in the cab and carefully disassembling and storing everything to stay compliant. When I stepped out to go to the restroom, someone had managed to get close to my truck and hide along the passenger side without me noticing until I walked past them. That person grabbed me from behind. I let out the loudest, most blood-curdling scream I could manage. There was no one else around, and I fought as hard as I could, trying to break free, but I was not doing very well. When I kicked, he lifted me off the ground, and when I tried to break his grip, he bent me forward while holding me from behind. I do not know how long I was screaming and fighting, but then I heard tires screeching and assumed it was something even worse. Instead, it was a small car full of local teenagers stopping for gas before school. The teens jumped out and ran toward us, while the driver stayed with the car. The man who grabbed me ran off. 2 of the teens chased him into the desert beyond the station, and the others stayed with me to make sure I was okay. I send those 4 boys Christmas and birthday cards every year because I am certain that without them, I would have been kidnapped or killed, and I will always be grateful to them. Story 11. When I was in high school, 2 friends and I were walking along the side of the road toward a McDonald's late at night. It was very dark, and about 20 feet ahead on the other side of the road, we noticed the sound of a lighter clicking, clearly directed at us. We whispered about it but kept walking, hoping to pass by. A homeless man suddenly walked out of the darkness toward us, saying that he knew we saw him. We tried to keep moving, and he said he just needed some money. When we did not stop, he yelled that he knew we did not want to die over money. We stopped and turned toward him, completely petrified. I tried to keep calm and told him we would give him what we had and to take it easy. We pulled out our wallets and handed over the few dollars we had, and he sat down in the grass, clutching the money and sobbing about how hungry he was. I realized I had held back $5, so I gave it to him and told him there was a McDonald's nearby where he could get food. He kept crying and praying out loud, and we eventually left, with me simply saying, "God bless you," before we walked away. It was a real eye-opener for me. In contrast to that experience, I was once at a Taco Bell on a road trip with friends when I went back to the counter to order more food, and a man approached me. He looked extremely rough, was visibly nervous, and kept stuttering while insisting that something was wrong with his truck and asking me to come take a look. I told him I was probably the least qualified person there, but he kept insisting. I glanced at my friends who were clearly signaling me not to go, and one of them loudly called out my name to stop me. I nodded to let them know I understood, and when I turned back, the man was already halfway out the door heading back to his car. Thinking about how easily that situation could have gone wrong still shakes me, and it made me realize how quickly a life can change if you are not paying attention. Story 12. My son and I were at a very crowded farmer's market, and he was about 10 or 11 at the time. He walked a little ahead of me, but I was never more than 20 or 30 feet away and kept a close eye on him as we wandered so we would not get separated. I noticed a man appearing at a few of the same booths as my son, and then I saw him start talking to him. At that point, I was alert but watching carefully, not intervening yet. I am a big guy, about 6'3" and 260 pounds, and I knew I could handle myself if needed. I stayed back so I had the advantage. The man kept following my son, and I noticed him starting to look around, as if checking whether anyone was watching. I slowly closed the distance, and he still had not noticed me. At that point, it was reasonable to suspect something was wrong, but I did not want to make a scene if he turned out to be an awkward but harmless person. Then he put his arm over my son's shoulder. I dropped my voice very low, spoke loudly, and called my son's name. My son spun around, thinking he was in trouble because I was using my sternest dad voice, and I was suddenly right behind them, towering over both of them. The man immediately took off. The entire thing happened in maybe a minute and a half or 2 minutes. Later, I saw him getting into a pickup truck with out-of-state plates. He had driven in from another state to try to take a child, and that day my son crossed paths with him. While my son was not in serious danger because I noticed what was happening, it still haunts me how easily my attention could have been elsewhere in that small window of time. Story 13. When I was a young girl, my mom took me to see every Harry Potter movie in the theater when they came out, and I grew up alongside the characters, as many people born in the 1990s did. This would have been the second or third movie, around 2003. About halfway through the film, I needed to use the bathroom. On my way back, just outside the theater door, there was a scraggly, dirty-looking man wearing a blue ball cap. He held his hand out toward me as if I were supposed to take it and asked me if I wanted to come with him. A heavy feeling dropped in my stomach and everything about the moment felt dangerous. Thankfully, my mom had taught me about being careful around strangers, so I ran as fast as I could back into the theater and sat down next to her. She could tell I was shaken and kept asking what was wrong, but I did not tell her right away. By the time I finally told her, more than half an hour had passed. She took me to the theater staff, where a teenage employee listened to my story and called the police, but they did not find the man. I still carry guilt for not saying something immediately. I worry that another child may have been harmed because I waited. At the time, I sensed his intentions were wrong, and now that I am older, I understand how dangerous that situation truly was. I will never forget his face. Story 14. I was about 19 and driving home from dinner one night, likely after grabbing a cheap ribeye sandwich from the local truck stop. A woman standing beside a motorcycle on the side of the road waved me down, so I stopped. She said she had run out of gas and added that she did not want to scare me, but her boyfriend was hiding down the bank. That was when a massive man climbed up from below, covered in dusty denim and leather, an intimidating wall of a person. I immediately thought it was a fake damsel in distress situation and that I had made a mistake. I was close to home and tried to convince myself I could leave if needed. The man apologized for hiding and explained that they had done it because no one would stop on an empty road with him standing there. He seemed embarrassed, and I felt a bit guilty for assuming the worst. We were isolated on a secondary road, but less than a mile from the interstate, and I could almost see my house. In the end, it turned out uneventful. I told him I had a gas can at home with at least a gallon left, and he said that would easily get them to the truck stop a few miles away. I went home and came back, and he insisted on paying me far more than the gas was worth, saying he was not sure he would have trusted someone to return in my place. It was only those few seconds of ice-cold fear between the woman saying she did not want to scare me and the man appearing from the bank that stayed with me. Story 15. I dropped my son off at school one morning and then went to the grocery store with my infant daughter. It was very early, and there were only one or two other customers inside. I noticed an older man using a walker who kept appearing in the same aisles as us, but I did not think much of it at the time. When I got back to my car, I loaded the groceries and started putting my daughter into her car seat. Suddenly, the man came up behind me and asked a question. When I turned to respond, he shoved his walker into the back of my legs, pinning me against my car inside the open door. I tried to move, but I could not go anywhere except forward, and he began pushing me down toward the floor of the car. I was terrified that once I was down, he would go for my daughter. So I threw myself over her, wedging my upper body into her car seat and covering her as much as I could. He grabbed my hair and tried to pull me up when someone started honking a car horn. Another mother had been sitting in her car with her own baby and saw what was happening. Another vehicle pulled in behind mine, and the man ran to it and got inside quickly, clearly not needing the walker at all. The police were called, but the license plates on the car were stolen, and as far as I know, he was never found. Story 16. In 2018, I was in Bari, southern Italy, for an Erasmus program, and on most warm Tuesday nights, we would go out to a bar called the Moderate because they had beer pong tournaments. One night, a friend of mine and I decided to bring our guitars so everyone could sing together and have a good time. At first, all our friends gathered around, along with Italian students, and it turned into an amazing atmosphere. But about 30 minutes in, two large men wearing black leather jackets approached our group, accompanied by two very attractive women. They started demanding that we play Italian songs that my friend and I had absolutely no idea how to play. So we tried to explain that to them. Even though they clearly understood us, they did not care and became more and more nervous and aggressive as the crowd slowly moved away. Until after another 5 to 10 minutes, it was just the two of them, my friend and me. We overheard parts of their conversation that made us suspect they might be connected to the local mafia, or at least had some kind of influence with the bar, which did not help our nerves at all. At one point, one of the men handed me his phone so I could recognize a song he had pulled up on YouTube instead of him just naming it. I quickly realized it was a simple chord progression, and as soon as my friend and I started playing it, their mood completely changed. They started singing, laughing, and dancing with their dates, clearly happy. They were so pleased that they went into the bar and brought out a round of shots for all 6 of us. My friend and I exchanged a look, knowing very well we could not refuse, so we drank the shots, hugged it out, and they left smiling. We were shaken afterward and realized how tense the situation had been for those few moments. Story 17. The stranger himself did not scare me, but a couple of weeks ago, I went for a walk with my child through the village where we live, and we crossed a level crossing. There was a young man standing on the tracks, and I immediately thought something was not right as we walked past him to the other side. Suddenly, the barriers lowered and the alarm sounded. I turned back and saw the man begin to shake. I knew exactly what was about to happen and started to panic. I shouted and screamed at him, but he did not react at all. I did not want to witness what was coming, and I especially did not want my 8-year-old to see it. I could hear the train approaching and knew I had to act, so I jumped over the barrier with the intention of pulling him out of the way. Just as I reached him, he moved aside and collapsed onto an electrical box that controls the barriers. The train passed, and I did not have time to jump back over, so I turned my back to the tracks and leaned against the barrier until it was gone. Once the barriers lifted, I went straight back to my child. They lowered again with the man still nearby, but thankfully someone had already called the police, who arrived within seconds. I asked if I could continue on my way since I was with my child, and they allowed me to leave. I still cannot get the image of him standing on those tracks out of my head. Story 18, I was extremely drunk with a close female friend at a rock show. She had taken off her top during the show, and I could tell she needed to calm down. So we went out to my truck so she could settle and sleep it off. I knew I could not drive and was terrified of getting in trouble just for sitting in the driver's seat. So I left the doors unlocked and tossed my keys into the back seat. She rested her head in my lap and fell asleep almost immediately. I leaned my seat back and closed my eyes, trying to steady myself. Suddenly, both truck doors flew open, and I heard a man say something about hurting her. There were three men, and two of them were grabbing at her from the passenger side, trying to pull her out, while another tried to drag me out from the driver's side. I swung at them but missed badly. I managed to slam the passenger door shut and lock it. I knew that if I got out, I would collapse, so I stayed inside, yelling, swearing, and using my loudest voice to draw attention and sound threatening. Somehow it worked, whether because of the noise or because they thought I might be more trouble than expected, and they backed off and left. Later, I had to tell my friend what almost happened, which was incredibly hard. Years later, she was married with children and invited me to a family gathering, where I learned she had shared that story with her family. Her parents thanked me and told me she always referred to me as her hero. I still think about that night often, especially when I feel worthless, because it was terrifying, life-changing, and it left me constantly worried about people who travel or go out alone. Story 19. I was in Paris at the train station that takes you to the airport. My flight was very early in the morning, so I planned to stay in the station until around 5 in the morning and then head to the airport. A man started talking to me in a very friendly way, complimenting my French and asking where I was from, and I lied because I was not about to give personal information to a stranger. He asked if I was going to the airport, and I said yes, early the next morning. At some point, I noticed another man circling around us, clearly connected to the first one, and that immediately gave me a bad feeling. I was a bit isolated because I was trying to use a ticket machine, and several of them were not working. I started walking toward the entrance where more people were sitting, but the first man kept talking to me while the second one followed. Then the first man told me that the station was closing in about 15 minutes, which surprised me, and he claimed it was because of vagrants. He tried to touch my arm, and I snapped at him asking what he thought he was doing. He said I should not stay there because it was a dangerous neighborhood and implied that something bad could happen to a pretty woman like me. He then offered to go to a hotel room with him. I looked at the reflection in the glass wall and realized the second man was getting even closer, and in that moment I was convinced I was about to be abducted. I was extremely nervous. Then I heard a woman speaking Spanish. She was with her two adult children, and I felt immediate relief. I walked straight to her and quietly but urgently told her in Spanish that those two men were harassing me and that I needed help. She did not hesitate. We stayed together for the rest of the night until the station reopened. I am forever grateful to her and her family because they protected me and helped me get home safely to my real mother. Story 20. I was working as a bartender and manager at a restaurant. A customer had come in several times, and the owner told him that since he usually went straight to the bar, he could park in the back and enter through the rear entrance, which was where employees parked as well, because it was safer for his expensive car. One night while I was managing and bartending, he told me that he had parked behind my car and would not move it unless I agreed to go for a ride with him. He sat at the bar for around 3 hours while I repeatedly told him that I was absolutely not getting into his car. As I was closing out the servers, he was still there, and one of the male servers named Caleb jokingly said that he would go for a ride instead. They left together, and I rushed to finish my work so I could leave before they returned. The next day, Caleb told me that the ride started out normal, but then the man kept driving farther and farther, ended up more than an hour away, and eventually kicked him out of the car because Caleb could not get him any substances. I am completely certain that if I had gone with him, the outcome would have been terrifying and potentially life-ruining. Story 21. I used to work as a cable technician for a large company in a busy metropolitan area, and because I handled escalations, I was often sent to very wealthy neighborhoods with homes worth well over $1 million. I received a work order for a cable box not working, with a note saying the customer needed a form to switch the account owner. Company policy strictly forbade technicians from bringing or processing those forms. So I confirmed this with my supervisor and was told to direct the customer to a service center. When I arrived at the condo, which was in an older but very expensive building with terrible wiring, the customer let me inside. I explained the situation about the form, and she immediately exploded. She screamed at me, insulted me, called me worthless, and accused me of being just like her abusive ex, even claiming that if something happened to her, it would be my fault. She was screaming inches from my face. I was a large man, strong and capable, and she was very small, but I was terrified because we were alone inside her home, and any accusation she made could have destroyed my life. I tried to keep calm and focused on the cable box, which turned out to be completely unplugged. While fixing it, I stayed positioned so I could always see her, genuinely afraid she might try to hurt me or falsely accuse me of something. Once the cable box was working, she stormed off to another room saying she was calling my company to get me fired. I took that moment to quietly unlock the door, slip out, and run for the stairwell. I went down several floors before taking the elevator and immediately called my supervisor to document everything. Nothing ever came of it, and later I was even sent back to her unit twice, where she did not recognize me and behaved normally. Still, that encounter remains the most frightening experience I ever had on the job. Story 22. When I was about 17 or 18, I would always volunteer to take our dog for his evening walk, which was really just an excuse so I could smoke a cigarette or a joint. On nights when it was a joint, I would take him through the cemetery that backed onto our house. I had absolutely no fear of the cemetery. Since we had lived there for years, my bedroom window looked out over it, and I walked through it constantly because it was the quickest route to the bus stop for school. It also had the advantage of being empty at night, so I could let the dog off his lead to wander around. He was a friendly golden retriever, but barked a lot at people he did not know, so we usually avoided letting him run free if anyone was nearby, and if someone was even 100 yards away, he would bark. I had gotten into the habit of looking up at the stars while slowly walking the circular path, since there were not many streetlights and the stars were bright, and it felt peaceful to walk like that, with my head tilted toward the sky. One night, near the end of the walk, a little fuzzy and distracted, I suddenly bumped into something solid. When I gathered my senses, I realized it was an older man just standing there. Startled, I asked what he was doing, and he calmly replied that the stars were always beautiful when viewed from that spot. Still in shock, I awkwardly agreed and walked toward my back gate, and when I reached it, my dog came bounding up behind me. I never saw that man again, despite many more night walks over the next 4 years that I lived with my parents. And to this day, I cannot understand how my dog never reacted to him at all. Story 23, I almost got lured into a hidden room behind a bookcase in a stranger's house after arranging to buy a roof rack online. I had agreed to pick it up after work around 9 in the evening, and since I had been searching for months for one that fit my old van, I trusted the seller when he assured me it came from the same model. I told him I was driving more than 2 hours to get there, so it needed to be right. As I got close, he suddenly sent me a picture of a hand-drawn map to his house, explaining that for privacy reasons he only shared the address once you arrived. It was not on any maps, so I had no choice but to follow his drawing along a very long gravel track, surrounded by dense trees. I eventually reached a huge metal gate with cameras pointed directly at me, and although I felt sick to my stomach, I told myself I was just being paranoid. As I debated leaving, the online listing disappeared, and the gate slowly opened, clearly controlled remotely. I drove farther along winding trees until I reached piles of broken cars and several open-sided shelters filled with junk, where a middle-aged man appeared. Telling myself to calm down, I got out to say hello, and he seemed friendly enough at first. When he showed me the roof rack, I immediately realized it was missing critical parts, making it useless. And when I asked about them, he casually said he did not know where they were. At that point, I knew something was wrong, but he brushed it off, apologized for wasting my time, and suggested I look around for anything else I might want. My instincts were screaming to leave, but I stayed polite and followed him as he insisted on showing me around his massive property, talking about photography and solar panels. He led me into a barn and turned on the lights, revealing a disturbing setup that included a massive circular bed, lighting, cameras, and boxes labeled with photos of partially dressed women. He called it his playroom and made comments about clothing and my size. When I tried to turn back, he closed the door and directed me through another exit toward the main house, where he showed me a hidden room behind a sliding bookcase that contained a small bathroom. Realizing I was in serious danger, I pretended to receive a phone call, claiming my friends were tracking my location and expecting me, then used the moment to walk past him and leave. I stayed upbeat and calm on the outside while rushing to my car, locked the doors and drove away shaking and crying, fully aware of how close I had come to something truly horrific. Story 24. I was walking my dog late at night during quarantine because my sleep schedule was completely messed up, and going out then helped my peace of mind since I could avoid people. I reached the end of the road where there is a parking lot for a trail that connects an outer part of town to the main city. Usually you might see people biking to overnight factory jobs or an occasional homeless person. Nothing especially alarming, and this is normally where I turn around. As I approached, I could hear two men talking, but I could not make out what they were saying. The first sound I made that they clearly heard was when I turned around at the edge of the parking lot and said, "Come on, dude," to my dog, and they immediately stopped talking. I did not think much of it at first, assuming they were just a couple of people I startled. I am a bigger guy and grew up in a rough area, so it usually takes a lot to scare me. As we kept walking, I noticed my dog turning his head to look behind us every so often, which struck me as strange. I glanced back a couple of times and saw nothing. What I later realized was that the two men had started following me, but instead of walking on the street or sidewalk, they were cutting through people's yards and staying in the shadows so they were almost impossible to see. Eventually, they reached a fenced yard and had to step into the street for a few seconds to go around it, and when they did, my dog noticed and became alert, which finally made me look properly. At the time, I still did not fully connect that they were the same two men I had heard earlier, and I kept walking, but they suddenly picked up their pace and started talking to each other. The moment I heard their voices clearly, I knew it was them. I started walking faster, but my dog kept looking back and slowing us down, and they were definitely gaining on us. When they were about 10 to 15 yards behind me, they started calling out, telling me to come over because they wanted to ask me something, speaking in deep, rough-sounding accents. My dog is not intimidating at all, and I was terrified of them hurting him or him getting caught in the middle if I had to defend myself. So I took him off his leash, which was a metal chain, wrapped it around my hand, and pulled out my pocket knife just to be prepared. I expected my dog to run ahead or toward home, but he stayed right by my side, clearly scared but not leaving me. In that moment, I decided to run, even though I am out of shape, and knew that if they caught me while exhausted, I would be in trouble, but I could not risk my dog being hurt. I kept urging him forward, and they chased us for roughly 3 city blocks before giving up once we reached a more populated area with cars passing by. I have been in situations involving weapons, robberies, and serious violence, but nothing has ever scared me more than the thought of my dog being harmed by those two men. Story 25. I was 11 years old and visiting the United States for the first time, traveling down the East Coast with my family in a rented recreational vehicle. We stopped at a large retail store, and I urgently needed to use the bathroom, so I ran inside alone. As I entered the restroom, I noticed a homeless man with a large duffel bag on his back who immediately made me uneasy. Wanting to be polite but also desperate to use the toilet, I held the door for him and rushed into the only stall with a toilet as soon as he touched the door. Once inside, I realized the toilet was filthy beyond belief, with the seat completely unusable, and since there were only urinals otherwise, I was about to leave in frustration. Suddenly, the man began speaking to me from outside the stall, accusing me of being disrespectful for not using the restroom alongside him and escalating into violent threats. I froze completely, my heart racing, unable to speak or move, and the size of his bag terrified me because I realized how easily a child my size could disappear into it. I tried calling my parents, but my phone had no service because I was using a European prepaid card. He continued ranting for what felt like forever before I finally heard him leave and the door slam shut. The problem was that the stall I was in was against the back wall, meaning I would have to walk past the urinals to exit, and I was terrified he might still be waiting. I took my keys, the only sharp object I had, and prepared myself in case I needed to defend myself. I flung the stall door open and ran as fast as I could, not even looking back until I was outside the store. I found my mother immediately, completely panicked and out of breath. Later, as we drove away, I saw the same man walking down the street nearby, and the memory of that encounter has stayed with me ever since. Story 26. I was at the beach with a few friends. Two of them were in the water, while another friend and I were lying on towels sunbathing. We were just talking when a man wearing a very revealing Speedo walked up to us. As he approached, he said, "Hey, how's it going?" In that casual way people do when they are passing by, but instead of continuing, he stopped directly in front of us. We answered that we were good, and he kept asking questions. I was immediately on guard, because who would not be when a stranger approaches like that? He asked if we were from the area, and I said no. He then asked where we were from, and I again said no, hoping he would get the hint. My friend stayed completely silent, and I could tell from her body language that she was scared. After a few more strange questions, he leaned in very close, extended his hand toward us, and gestured as if telling us to come with him. I took my sunglasses off, looked him straight in the face, and said a firm, harsh no, and he backed away and walked off. The strangest part was how far he walked in the direction he came from, going so far that we could not even see him anymore, which meant he had walked a long distance just to reach us in the first place. I had not noticed it at the time because I never made eye contact with him, but my friend later told me she was terrified because he had a phone in his hand and was holding it in a way that made it look like he was either taking photos or recording us. Either way, it remains the strangest and most unsettling encounter I have ever had. Story 27. When I was 12 years old, I attended a wedding where I was a bridesmaid. After dancing with my younger brother and waiting for the food to be ready, I went to the open buffet to get something to eat. While I was serving myself, a man from the groom's side of the family approached me and started making conversation. He was much older, probably in his 60s or 70s, and at first he asked normal things like how the music was and whether I was enjoying myself. As I continued getting food, his questions became increasingly uncomfortable. He asked my age, asked whether I liked boys or girls, and asked if I was dating anyone. I started getting a bad feeling and felt my anxiety rise. He then began asking hypothetical questions about us, and I had no idea how to respond. I started looking around nervously, hoping someone would notice. My grandmother had been watching me the entire time, and when she saw the panic on my face, she came over and told me that my mom was looking for me and that we should go sit down. She gave the man a very suspicious look as she guided me away. Once seated, I explained everything to my grandmother and mother, who were both horrified. My mom told my aunt, the bride's mother, who then informed the groom's parents. It turned out the man was the groom's uncle and had been asking the same disturbing questions to several other young girls at the wedding. He already had a history of inappropriate behavior toward women, and that night it crossed into targeting children. He was eventually asked to leave, but I remained nervous for the rest of the evening, even while dancing, constantly feeling like he might still be watching me. Story 28. This was more creepy than outright terrifying, but it still bothers me to this day. I was about 20 years old at the time, though I am 35 now, and I was at a gas station in a fairly busy area filling up my car. A truck pulled in and stopped in the middle of the pump area so that the driver's side was only a few feet from me. The man leaned across from the driver's seat, opened the passenger door, and asked if I could help him out. I raised my eyebrows, waiting for him to explain. He told me to come closer and said he had hurt his back and dropped his phone on the passenger side floor, asking if I could help find it. I stepped a little closer but stayed several feet away and leaned forward to look. He said I would not be able to see it from there and claimed it had slid toward the back seat. I moved slightly closer but still did not touch the truck. It was an extended cab, two-door truck, and I could see fairly clearly under the seat from where I stood and did not see a phone at all. I pulled out my own phone and suggested calling his number to locate it, explaining that I did not feel comfortable digging around inside his vehicle. His demeanor instantly changed, and he snapped at me, telling me to climb in and look. At the same time, I noticed how easily he was moving and leaning across the truck for someone who claimed to have a bad back. He pushed the seat forward himself and insisted again that I needed to climb in. At that point, I told him clearly that I was not getting into his truck and repeated my offer to call his phone instead. As I began backing away, he became visibly angry, slammed the passenger door shut by reaching all the way across the cab, and sped off. I wish I had paid attention to his license plate and reported it. The more I think about it, the more unsettling it becomes, because he clearly did not need help at all. What disturbed me most was that he looked completely normal, young, well-groomed, driving a nice vehicle, and I can easily see how someone less cautious than me could have been pulled into a very dangerous situation. Story 29, I was 19 and went to a free concert in the Power and Light District in Kansas City to see Taking Back Sunday. The area was outdoors, but to actually enter the venue, you had to be 21. So there were groups of people standing around the gates where you could still watch the show. A few of us were standing together between sets when a massive bald man without a shirt walked up. I am 6'2", and he still managed to make me feel small. He looked completely out of it, likely on something, and did not say a single word. He tried to get into the venue, but security refused to let him in because he was shirtless and clearly not okay. He walked away silently, then suddenly stopped, turned around, slapped one of the women in our group on the backside, and ran off. I yelled something at him, and he turned, locked eyes with me for a moment, and then disappeared. It was strange, but the woman was all right and did not want to let it ruin her night. Later, during the middle of the Taking Back Sunday set, everything was going great, the energy was high, and people were having fun, when I suddenly got an intense feeling that something was wrong. I looked around and saw him again. Inside the venue was a suspended walkway connecting bars, overlooking the entire crowd, usually packed with people. Yet there was one person standing completely still and staring directly at me. It was the same shirtless, bald man. I have no idea how he got inside or how long he had been there, but for the next 40 minutes, he never took his eyes off me and never moved. I felt safe as long as I could see him, but the second the show ended, I left as fast as I could. Story 30, I have been followed home twice. The first time I was living in a flat near the city center and walking home while on the phone with a friend when a man started following me and trying to get my attention. I began to panic because I had just passed the only open place I could have ducked into, so I decided to pick up my pace and try to make it home, which was about 5 minutes away. I begged my friend to stay on the phone and told him exactly where I was with every step until the man finally backed off, but not before squeezing my backside. A few days later, women in my city started sharing stories about a so-called pickup artist harassing them in similar ways. And although it was dark when it happened to me, I am almost certain it was the same man. The second time happened after I had moved back in with my mother. I was walking home from work one night when I noticed someone following me again. I sped up, and he matched my pace, which made me panic until another man appeared walking toward us. I stopped him, quickly explained that I was being followed, and asked him to play along, then started talking to him like we were old friends. He watched behind me and told me when the follower had walked away, and he stayed nearby for a few minutes just in case. I got home and called the police, only to be told it was probably someone on day release who did not know any better and that they would keep an eye out. I live near a mental health facility, so that response was not comforting, especially since it was around 9:30 at night. Feeling completely dismissed, I warned others on social media by posting a description of the man, and several neighbors and friends replied saying someone matching that description had been seen watching children playing football and following other girls as well. Thankfully, no children were harmed, but I do not know if the man was ever caught. And while the first man eventually was identified, he faced no real consequences for what he did. Story 31, I was working as a server on the breakfast shift at a restaurant and bar located inside a small hotel. And because it was quiet and catered mostly to guests or local construction workers, I was almost always alone on that shift. A woman who looked to be around her late 20s came in for breakfast, nothing seeming out of the ordinary at first, although she spoke a bit strangely, which I initially brushed off. She ordered a coffee, asked for the bill, then changed her mind and ordered pancakes after I brought the check. And that was when I noticed she had left a $70 tip on a $2 coffee. I double-checked with her, and she laughed and said it was on her boss and that it was real, which confused me, but the card was approved. A short time later, 2 construction workers came in, both normal and friendly guys, and she called them over to sit with her, even though they were my only other tables. They looked uncomfortable at first, but she was charismatic and persistent, and soon she was sitting between them, touching their faces and making very inappropriate comments, then tossing $200 at my feet and demanding one of everything on the menu. The whole situation was surreal, with her loudly bragging about herself, flirting aggressively, and inviting them up to her room, while the men laughed awkwardly and looked at me like they could not believe what was happening. At one point, she made a degrading comment toward me, and one of the men even called her out for it, but she doubled down by belittling my profession. It became obvious the construction workers were not interested in anything beyond the free food, and we ended up pushing together several tables to fit everything she ordered. It was also around this time I realized she was likely intoxicated, as she kept going to the bathroom and was unsteady on her feet, despite it only being 8 in the morning. When the men eventually tried to leave for work, she attempted to climb onto them, and they had to physically push her away and firmly state they were not interested before leaving. She paid the bill, which totaled close to $1,000 on her boss's card, and tipped me another $200. I later learned there was a national academic conference nearby, and she was supposedly a teaching assistant using her supervisor's card, which only made the situation more alarming given her condition. After her attempt to buy attention failed, she stayed behind sobbing in the booth, refusing to leave even as time passed and the restaurant emptied. Eventually, my manager intervened, and we discovered she had been secretly drinking straight from a bottle of alcohol hidden in her backpack. When confronted, she became belligerent, refused to leave, and the police were called. While waiting, I watched from behind a divider as she rocked back and forth, muttering to herself in an unsettling way about people making her angry. When the police arrived, they tried to handle the situation calmly, but she became violent, striking one of the officers, which led to her being restrained and dragged out of the hotel while screaming threats that she would return and make everyone pay. My manager awkwardly apologized to the remaining guests and closed the restaurant early, and although her threats never came true, it remains one of the most disturbing and bizarre mornings I have ever experienced at work. Story 32. When I was 21, I was at a UDF getting ice cream for myself and my girlfriend, who was waiting in the car. An older man walked in and stood next to me, and every time I shifted away from him, he edged closer. I texted my girlfriend to come inside, and as soon as she did, she noticed what was happening and immediately stepped between me and the man. I focused very deliberately on the ice cream tubs, acting as if nothing was wrong and as if I had been waiting for her the entire time. My girlfriend is transgender, very tall, and does not blend in easily, and the moment the man realized she was with me, he rushed out of the store. Once we were back in the car, she hugged me tightly and told me she did not want me going into places like that alone after dark anymore. She later explained that she had noticed something about his behavior and posture that made the situation even more disturbing. Something I had not seen because of my height and because I was intentionally avoiding looking at him. While I kept my eyes away, she stood there holding me close and giving him a look that made it very clear he needed to leave immediately. I was only able to relax because I trusted her completely, knowing she had years of martial arts training and would protect me if anything had happened. And I did not want to give that man any more attention than he already demanded. Story 33. It was not exactly scary, just very strange. I was sitting on a bench in Paris while visiting friends from Sydney, waiting for someone to finish work so we could get dinner. A man in his 30s walked past looking hurried, dressed casually, and asked me something in French. I told him I was sorry and that I did not speak French, and he laughed, saying he should have known I was not from Paris because I seemed too friendly, then invited me to a party at his apartment that night. I politely declined, but he insisted and asked for my number. Being awkward about saying no, I lied and said I did not know my number, but let him put his number into my phone instead, then told him I had to go. I walked about 30 meters down the street and stopped at a traffic light when another man in his 30s, this time British and dressed much more formally, approached me and started chatting, saying he could tell I was not from Paris. After a bit of small talk, he also asked for my number and invited me to a party that night. I repeated almost the exact same exchange I had just had minutes earlier and let him put his number into my phone as well. I should add that I looked very average and was dressed casually in shorts, a t-shirt and trainers. And no one had ever stopped me like that before, let alone two men within 5 minutes. It was probably nothing, but the coincidence felt so odd that I genuinely wondered if I was being set up or somehow part of a strange social experiment. Story 34, I was 14 and at my little brother's basketball game at a local high school across the street from a large shopping center. And since I was not very interested in watching 7-year-olds play basketball, I asked my mom if I could walk over to the Kohl's to see if they had any Star Wars action figures, which I collected and still do. She said yes, and I headed over, deciding to jaywalk because there was no crosswalk nearby, stopping on the large median between lanes of traffic while cars passed. At that time in my life, almost 8 years ago, I was overweight and very insecure about it, with a short haircut, and only years later did I lose weight and grow my hair out. After finding no action figures, I headed back and jaywalked again, stopping on the median when suddenly a stranger appeared right behind me out of nowhere. He was a little taller than me, thin, with long brown hair, and he said, "Hey man, how's it going?" I replied that I was fine, and he smiled and said, "Awesome man, I just wanted to let you know that I'm you from the future." I do not even remember how I responded because I was still trying to figure out where he had come from, but he kept talking and told me that no matter how things looked right now, everything was going to be okay. I was so weirded out and honestly too insecure to question him, so I think I just said something like, "Okay, cool," and then crossed the rest of the street. When I reached the other side, I looked back and there was no sign of him anywhere. At the time, I assumed he was just a strange person, since he did not really look like me beyond having brown hair, and he was well dressed and did not seem unstable. But as I have gotten older, lost weight, grown my hair longer, and filled out differently, I have started to resemble him more and more, which still messes with my head. It was probably just a bizarre encounter, but if I ever discover time travel, I know exactly where I am going and what I am going to say to my younger self. Story 35. A few years back, I spent an afternoon and early evening hanging out with a friend, and eventually we made our way to train station A, which was the station I normally used to get home, but we ended up deep in conversation and stayed sitting in the lobby for a long time. Station A was very close to the nightlife area of the city, and it was either a Friday or Saturday evening. So as we talked, more and more people began arriving at the station to head out to clubs, with most of the foot traffic moving in one direction since it was still early. At some point, a guy caught my attention because I vaguely recognized him from a school I had attended years earlier, though I did not know his name or anything about him, and he walked past us. What started to feel unsettling was that I lost count of how many times he went back and forth through the open barriers, repeatedly heading toward the platform I would normally use, disappearing out of sight, then coming back through the station and briefly leaving before returning again. And each time he passed, he looked directly at me. I eventually pointed this out to my friend, who admitted he had noticed it too, and he suggested that the next time the guy went back up to the platform, we should leave the station entirely and walk the roughly 20-minute route to Station B, which was on the same line but further along. We assumed the guy might have been waiting to follow me on the train and would give up if I disappeared, so we left, and I even called my dad to explain what we were doing. By the time we reached Station B, we felt calmer, and my friend and I parted ways there, with me boarding the train towards Station C, my home station. My stomach dropped when I settled into my seat and realized the same guy was on the train. I texted my dad asking him to come get me, but he did not fully grasp how frightened I was, so when I reached Station C, I avoided the man entirely, got into a cab, and went straight home. Nothing actually happened, but given that almost everyone else at that time of night was heading out while I was one of the few going home, I am convinced he was trying to follow me, and that thought still scares me.